Okay, so get yourself nice and comfortable. Just check your posture. Just feel nice and relaxed. Your back nice and straight, ideally. The main thing is you're nice and comfortable. First, let's just meditate on our breathing just for a few minutes to help calm down the mind. Get our attention more fully into the present moment. So just turn your attention onto the natural rhythms of your breathing. Don't force it, just breathe naturally. Just notice the subtle sensations. The air enters at the nostrils. The diaphragm moves down, the air goes down into your lungs. And again, as your diaphragm pushes back up, forcing the air to leave your body again at that point at the nostrils, and particularly notice the subtle sensations there. The air enters and leaves your body. You're going to try and hold your attention at that point of the nostrils, again, just noticing those subtle sensations. Don't force it, it should be nice and relaxed. And as soon as you notice you become distracted, don't worry about it. That's normal. But as soon as you notice, just in a nice, relaxed way, place your attention back at that point of the nostril. Don't follow those thoughts or distractions, just let them naturally fall away. They can wait till later. Just do that quietly to yourself for a couple of minutes. Okay, I'm now going to recite very slowly the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. You can join in with me if you like. Comfortable with that, there's no obligation. Just do a little reflection again on the second part. In my heart, I turn to the three jewels of refuge. May I free suffering creatures and place them in bliss. May the compassionate spirit of love grow within me, that I might complete the enlightening path. In my heart, I turn to the three jewels of refuge. May I free suffering creatures and place them in bliss. May the compassionate spirit of love grow within me, that I might complete the enlightening path. In my heart, I turn to the three jewels of refuge. May I free suffering creatures and place them in bliss. May the compassionate spirit of love grow within me, that I might complete the enlightening path. And now we're going to reflect on the meaning of those words I've just recited, and particularly the motivation part. Which is about what we ordinarily call bodhicitta. That's the altruistic intention to become enlightened so we can be of the most benefit to all living beings. And generating this is a really big part of these thought transformation techniques that we're looking at. At the very least, let's think we're not here just to benefit ourselves, although that's important. You matter just as much as everybody else. But also to put us in a better position to be able to truly benefit others. Okay. Right, we're going to be looking at the middle verses of the 8 verses today. I think you should all have received this by now, I think, haven't you, the 8 verses? I think I've sent to everybody now. We're going to be looking today at verses 4, 5 and 6, which particularly are about when we encounter people that we find difficult. Which for me is one of the biggest benefits of these methods of thought transformation, the kinds of situations we normally try and avoid and perhaps think of as problematic, or think, why is this happening to me today? We can actually embrace these situations and use them positively, which is what this is about. It doesn't mean it's easy, it's a gradual process. And again, I know I emphasize this a lot, but it's really, really important when we're applying all this kind of thing, that we're gentle with ourselves and realistic. Don't expect too much of ourselves straight away. I think it's really, really important now. We should take joy just in the fact we're trying and making an effort, which was something that came out at the end of the discussion last week, which I thought was really important. So what I thought I'd do tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about these verses. I don't want to go on too much tonight because I want us to be able to discuss these and hopefully think of examples in our life. But I'll just talk a little bit about them, and I'll read the verse first. So I'm going to start with verse 4, which is, whenever I meet a person of bad nature who is overwhelmed by negative energy and intense suffering, I will hold such a rare one dear, as if I had found a precious treasure. Now, the first thing I wanted to talk about in relation to that one is what we mean by a person of bad nature, because we have to be a bit careful with this. There's no such thing as an inherently bad person or intrinsically bad person. And I think that's really, really important. The first thing we have to do, is take into account our own subjective projections. I think we all know that there are people that we find very difficult and don't get on very well, Other people might get on really, really easily and well with them. Now, that's usually the case if we check. And it's important to remind ourselves of that sometimes. I think we're not necessarily seeing the person objectively out there. We have to take that into account. Also, there are people, though, who I think we all can think of examples who do seem to have a lot of negative energy and can have quite a negative effect on the people around them. And we can probably all think of people like that, whether it's through work or the community we live in or wherever. But even in those cases, that doesn't mean that they're like that for all time or they've always been like that. Quite possibly they weren't like that when they're children. They probably weren't. If we think in terms of past and future lives, which I haven't talked too much about on this course, but in Buddhism, we're often encouraged, if we can, to think like that. But that resonates with some people more than others. So don't worry if this doesn't resonate with you. But if you can think like that, you can think how even people that you find very, very difficult now, at some point in the past, if we start thinking about beginningless past and future lives, they've probably been our best friend or our mother or something like that in the past. May well be again in the future. That's one thing you can bring into your practice, if that resonates with you. Even if it doesn't, though, we can see that people change a lot within the course of this life. I'm sure we all know people who seem to have really, really improved over the years. We probably think of people in our family and people like that. People can change. And everybody has the same potential. And that is important from a Buddhist point of view. Everybody has the potential for enlightenment. So there are no exceptions to that. And I'm not just talking about humans either. I mean, every living being has ultimately that potential. And that's a good thing to remind ourselves of sometimes. Also, it's good to bear in mind, I think, people who have a lot of negative energy, quite often they're very unhappy. And that's a good thing to remind ourselves of sometimes. And if anything, they're more deserving about compassion or needing of it, than people who aren't, are a lot more pleasant. So those are good things to bear in mind. But the real crux of this verse is when we're coming into contact with people who we find very, very difficult. So it actually uses the language here, I'll hold such a rare one dear as if I found a precious treasure. And we're particularly encouraged to think of them as our teachers. And thinking like that can really turn things around sometimes. Again, it's not always easy, but it's easy to practice things like compassion and love towards people that we get on very easily with. It's only when we meet people that are difficult that these things are really, really tested. And that's a good thing to bear in mind as well. And if you can do that and think of people like that as actually teaching you something, as I say, it puts a really positive slant on these kinds of situations. It's said that bodhisattvas, and particularly advanced bodhisattvas, actually pray at the start of the day that they're going to come into contact with really difficult and uncooperative people in the course of their day. Now, it's a good thing to adopt that if you can, but again, I know I bang on about this a lot, but we do have to be gentle and realistic with ourselves about this and not con yourself that you're further along the path than you are. For most of us at the moment, if we actually actively seek out negative people all the time, it would start dragging us down. So you have to be skillful with that, yeah? But for most of us, I don't think we have to actively seek out difficult people to come into contact with them. As we were saying at the start, life can be very generous like this, and we all come into contact with people that we find difficult. And if we can just adopt a kind of attitude, if you could start at the day, if you have a morning practice, just really resolve, if I come into contact with difficult people today, I'm going to do everything I can to bring my practice to bear and to turn those situations around and use them as a positive opportunity to practice. It's a really, really good attitude to adopt. We talked a little bit at the end of the discussion last week about how bodhicitta and these kinds of practices is sometimes compared to armor. It can make us a lot more resilient when we're encountering difficulties in our lives. And if we have this kind of attitude that's more willing to kind of embrace difficulties and problems and difficult people, it brings this kind of resilience with it. I think if we check a lot of the suffering we experience and problems, it's often from our aversion to things and sort of pushing them away and not wanting to experience them causes as much problems, and sometimes more, than the actual situation itself. You know, if we tend to procrastinate, for instance, and put things off, like things we need to deal with, I think we often find if we just embrace this thing and start dealing with it, it starts to sort itself out. You know, we could create a lot of unnecessary suffering just by hoping nothing's wrong is ever going to happen to us, which isn't actually very realistic. And that's another side of this. If we can actually see these kinds of situations, not as things, oh, why is this happening to me today? This is so unfair. I don't need this today. Instead, just with a more realistic attitude that we're inevitably going to encounter people who find difficult. But we determine that I'm not going to just react to that situation. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to let it get me down too much. I'm going to use it as an opportunity to practice. Yeah, and that's the main point here when we talk about using difficult people as our teachers. So that's all I'm going to say about verse 4. We are going to have plenty of time to discuss this. As I say, I don't want to talk too long tonight. So I'll move on to the next one, which is verse 5. And I'll read this again. When others, out of jealousy, mistreat me with abuse, slander, and scorn, I will practice accepting defeat and offering the victory to them. Now, the first thing I thought I ought to explain is what we mean by practice accepting defeat. This doesn't mean that when somebody's kicking us, we should just say, fine, keep kicking me, kick me more. It doesn't mean that, and that's quite important. Obviously, that wouldn't be very good for us, but it probably wouldn't be very good for the other person either. It would actually be encouraging them to act negatively. I know that's an extreme example, but you can transpose that into a more realistic thing. It is good sometimes to stand up for yourself, and it's important, and also very importantly to stand up for others, and not just always just to allow sort of people to do negative things without doing anything about it. So that's not what this is saying at all. I mean, in my younger life, I worked as a policeman in London, and obviously a big part of that job is protecting and standing up for vulnerable people. But we all have times in our lives probably when we're faced with that kind of problem and difficulty, and we should and make a stand sometimes, but do it kindly with compassion, not with anger. That's the really important thing there. What we really mean here when we talk about accepting defeat, it's overcoming that need to kind of have the last word or always be proved right. And this is something I suspect we can all identify in our lives if we check really, really honestly. It's kind of letting go of the ego's need to prove itself right and to always be the winner in that sense. That's what this really means when it talks about giving victory to others. I'll give it one example from my life where I found this quite effective over the years. Is my relationship with my father, which, like quite a lot of people, have quite difficult relationships for one reason or another with their parents or the family. We've actually got a very good relationship now, but it was a bit fiery at times when I was younger, if I'm honest. I was very quick to see where he was always trying to put me right and to turn me around to his way of thinking. What I wasn't quite so aware of until I really caught it was I was actually doing that back to him, and sometimes even more strongly than he was. And you get into this game, what I sometimes think it's like ego tennis that just sort of goes on forever, you know, and it's very, very unproductive and it just creates problems. Spotting that and applying this and just letting it go sometimes, in that sense, letting him have the victory, created more space for us to work on the more positive sides of our relationship. And that was an area where I found this very, very effective, but it's just letting go sometimes. I know it's an overly used phrase, letting go, but it is really, really important sometimes. We can all get lock horns with people like this, and it's, you know, it's detrimental to both parties in the long run. Another thing it says here in the verses is when others out of jealousy, it says in the first line, mistreat me with abuse, slander, and scorn. It's inevitable that some people will get jealous of us sometimes. And if we check really honestly, I think we'll find we get jealous about other people as well, you know, for one reason or another. Again, these are all manifestations of the ego, which is the root of our problems, you know, from a Buddhist point of view. And if this is happening to us and we feel people are speaking unfairly about us, one way you can use it is to actually really, really check, hang on, am I doing this at all myself? Either in this situation or in other situations, and really try to be mindful of that, so that you're not adding to this kind of thing yourself. That's one side of it. It's also, though, sometimes good to talk things through. with other people if people are talking unfairly about us, either with the person who's talking or with, if he's slandered us to other people, it might be worth talking things through with those people. But again, it's really, really important that we do it with kindness and with wisdom and gently. And it's not, again, just to kind of justify ourselves, you know, too obsessively. But sometimes that won't work, and it doesn't work with people. We have to accept that. You know, and you can talk as much as you like, and it doesn't seem to be helping. And at that point, you just have to let things go sometimes. And try not to worry about it too much. Let things work themselves out over the longer scale. You know, which is important from a Buddhist point of view. And it's okay sometimes if not everybody likes us. And I think that can be liberating. We all want to be loved, we want to be popular, we want people to like us. That's perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it can often motivate us to act well towards others. So it can be a good thing. But if we get too wrapped up in that, again, it can be another manifesting of ego, which can be quite problematic. And again, it's part of letting go that sometimes. So, okay, that's fine. I mean, move on. And you know, as I say, in Buddhism, we're really encouraged to work towards long-term goals and not so much short-term goals. And letting go sometimes can be an important part of that. Okay, so that's verse 5, and then I'll move on to verse 6 now and just say a few words about this, and then we'll have some discussion on all this. Again, I'll read the verse. Sorry. This is when someone I've benefited and in whom I've placed great trust hurts me very badly, I will practice seeing that person as my supreme teacher. And again, we're back here again to seeing people as our teachers. You know, it's particularly emphasised in this verse. Now, this is the sort of situation that can be very difficult. We think we've been kind towards somebody and helped them. I mean, initially, we might just not think they're as grateful as they could be, but it might be they actually seem to do something negative and treat us unfairly. That can be very, very difficult sometimes. But again, these are really, really good times to apply our practice, and particularly to test our motivation. When we're doing acts of kindness, we're encouraged not to do it for short-term reward, and so the person will immediately like us or necessarily be as grateful we like. And that's quite important. But we're going to be looking at that a little bit more next week when we get to the last verse, actually, in the 8 verses. And I'm just going to give one example of this, again, from our life, because I want to encourage people when we chat about this, if you can connect this to things in your life, it's more effective. And one thing Sarah and I sometimes do is we do sing-alongs in old people's homes, so particularly to help people with dementia, which is great fun normally. It's something we really enjoy doing, and we think of it as part of our practice. Normally, when you're doing that, people are very, very nice to you. They tend to be quite grateful and appreciative. Once in a while, though, people aren't at all. I'm talking about individuals, particularly if you're dealing with people with dementia, where there's no filter. And people will tend to just say things, you know, without really thinking. And I remember the first time that it happened to me when we were doing one of these, and one particular lady really, really savaged me right in the middle while we were doing it. I was absolutely laying into everything I was doing, my guitar playing, the singing and everything. It was quite difficult at the time. I mean, I smiled my way through it and didn't give anything away. But if I really, really checked, it was quite interesting what was going on in my mind. And I could feel almost like my ego was sort of blowing up like a balloon. There is a problem when you're doing anything like that and you're the centre of attention and everybody's been very, very grateful and appreciated it. It does build you up a little bit. It can build you up a little bit. And I could almost see that happening. And it was like this lady just got a pin and just stuck it in that balloon and just burst it just like that. And it really made me laugh when I caught that and looked at it. And she actually gave me a really, really good teaching. And it's something that I've taken into every sing-along we've done since. And we're really, really trying to get my motivation good at the start before I do it. And I think about a tutor and things like that. And to be more resilient when that kind of thing arises again, which I am now, you know, and it's easier. Nobody's ever done it quite strongly actually since then. But again, I'm thankful to that lady, and it did actually help me in the long run. We can't always expect things to go the way we want. That's unrealistic, isn't it? And again, if you do apply this kind of practice, and particularly if you lose it to turn around self-centeredness, which I'll come to again in a minute, it's incredibly beneficial to you, as well as putting you in a better position to be able to really help and serve others, which is the point. Now, that's just one example from my life. You can probably think of other areas of your life where that's happened. And you can share this, obviously, when we get to the discussion, where, as I say, where you think you're doing something nice and kind and people are going to appreciate it, and they don't necessarily. It's a good time to check that. And as it says in that verse, I'll come back to this again, we try and see people like that as our supreme teachers. And okay, what are they teaching us? I mean, there's a whole range of things, actually. First of all, our motivation, how pure our motivation is for doing that in the first place. And that's a really good thing to check. Having really pure motivation is quite hard. It's something we have to keep working on. You know, the ego can be quite sly, and it can creep in, you know, all sorts of things we do. Letting go of expectations, which is good. We have a lot of unrealistic expectations often. We want things always to go well and go right. But it's not realistic. That's not how life pans out, is it? I think we all experience that. Again, it helps us to develop really pure and loving compassion that's free of self-centered attachment and aversion. Another side, which is bringing the wisdom side of the path more in, which I'm going to talk a bit more about next week, and emptiness, but it can help us let go of our very, very solid images of ourselves, this I, the strong I we have, and of others as well, and that can be very helpful, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about that next week. And again, of course, developing patience, and the kind of patience we're talking about with other people is the kind of patience that allows other people to make mistakes. And again, coming back to the essential equality I talked about at the start tonight, you know, where we all want happiness, we don't want suffering, but we're not always doing the right things to achieve that, you know, due to ignorance and the other afflictions. Now, really importantly, though, and I'm going to finish with this because this is kind of our go-to theme with all these, it really can show us our own self-centeredness, which, as I've started with in the first week, is at the root of all our problems, you know, from a Buddhist point of view. I'll use an expression that I actually got from Tubden Chodron, Venerable Tubden Chodron, where she talks about using thought transformation to burst our ego bubble. It's a bit like the balloon example I used a minute ago. And the more we can do that, it actually helps us really open up to be able to appreciate life in all its beauty and its wonder, and living really in accord with that interconnection, interdependence with others, which is what it's all about. Just the last thing I'm going to say before we do discussion, I've used the term ego a few times tonight, which I haven't before. We're sometimes a little bit wary in Buddhism. We often use the term ego in common parlance, and usually as a negative thing when we talk about having a big ego and things like that. But ego literally means your sense of self, or your notions of I. It means I am in Latin, isn't it, the word. We do have to be a bit careful of that in Buddhism, because not all our notions of self are wrong. And I might well again address this next week when we talk a little bit about emptiness. But there are right and wrong notions of self, and I think that's quite important. Clearly, we all exist, you know, but we're not the same person. But when I use ego in this context, going back to what I explained in the first week, it's that combination of two things: self-grasping ignorance, which is grasping at this notion of an I that's more solid, more inherent, more independent, more separate from others than is actually the case. It's that, which is what we sometimes call fundamental ignorance, in combination with the self-cherishing, again, which I explained in the first week, where that's the attitude that's primarily concerned with our own happiness, not quite so concerned, if we're really honest, with the happiness of others. And we're trying to turn that around to develop an attitude that just cares about everybody equally. We want to do what we can to overcome suffering and problems. It doesn't matter who's experiencing it, just in the same way that we naturally do with our own, you know, at the moment. Okay, so that's enough from me. Are there any questions on anything I've said there before we go to discussion? Other things we come. Thanks. That's fine. I mean, other things can be contributory causes. It doesn't mean that people aren't doing things to us, but it's still up to us how we react to it, and that is something we can change. And it's actually quite empowering that. And it gets us out of this tendency to sort of blame everything out there for our problems. No, it's on me. It's up to me. I can do something about this, you know. Which I think is one of the most empowering sides of the Dharma generally, and it's a really big part of thought transformation. Does anybody else want to say anything? Because we missed, I know you're obviously having some really good discussions. You can see by the look on people's faces. Toby, Adita, do you want to say anything from the things you were sharing? Because obviously I didn't hear those.
I'll just recap on what I said. I was just saying that I've got a kind of difficult brother, and we've had a difficult relationship for many years. But I kind of, as the years went by, and I guess it's related to practice, is I kind of started to see that his behaviour was kind of rooted in his own suffering. You know, he's been through a lot, and I couldn't see that for years. And I just thought, oh, you know, he's just about pressing my buttons, and that's kind of like what he likes to do, and all the rest of it. And then, you know, over the years, it sort of softened and softened to the kind of extent where now I kind of just see him, I see his suffering, you know, and it doesn't, his behavior doesn't affect me as much. There's a bit more space around it, you know, and I'm a bit kind of softer in relation to it. So yeah, that's kind of what I said.
Nice. No, thanks for
Also, I
sharing.
said another thing as well, just about bringing in a bit of compassion as well for self in these situations, you know, because recognizing that there is suffering in relation to difficult relationships on your side as well, and kind of, you know, opening to that with compassionately. Well, it's important.
Yeah, very much so. Does anybody else want to say anything?
I had a very long-winded because I'm in a rambly sort of mood, so I'll say this very shortly. I made a Buddhist card for one of my friends, and I just talked about it, and they ripped it up. And like this wasn't recently, but it was like when I was 14, and I got kind of upset because like I gave it to them, and I was expecting them to like cherish it. But they ripped it up, like at the end of the lesson, they ripped it up and put it in the bin. And I noticed it, and don't feel sad, Toby.
It's getting me as well.
No, it's no sad.
No, but it wasn't that bad, to be honest. But then I sort of realised that it's not about material possessions. It's about like giving it from the heart, like giving something to somebody else, like generosity. It's like the core teachings of the Buddhist path. Like it's like generosity is something to be cherished, and from that point of view, the person giving is the person who's like receiving.
That's wonderful. That's really, really nice.
Yeah. Sorry, I took the spotlight here, but I'm sorry.
That's actually quite profound what you just said. You expressed that beautifully. And that's what it's all about. We're going to be talking next week about the worldly dharmas and trying to make our motivation as pure as possible. And you just expressed that beautifully. And it's also helpful if it can be done with an understanding of emptiness, but more of that later as well. But that helps exactly what you were describing there. Yeah, so we can do things without any self-centered attachments at all. But the more you appreciate, I'm almost spoiling what you said if I talk too much about it. But taking joy in just the act itself without looking for anything back from it is very much part of the process, which I thought you expressed beautifully. But thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really nice note to go into meditation on. I thought we'd go back to Tonglen practice again this week. This is going to be a big part of our discussion next week, this Tonglen practice. Last week, for anybody who wasn't here, we did a meditation on the 8 verses and did a little reflection on each of the 8 verses as we went through. And that is on the recording from last week, obviously, if anybody missed that and they want that. But let's do a little bit of Tonglen now and then. Taking and giving. So get yourself nice and comfy. And we'll try and connect this with what we've just been talking about. So again, just get yourself nice and comfy and check your posture. The most important thing, you're nice and relaxed and that your back's nice and straight without forcing it. It's just easy to sit comfortably like. But if any point during this meditation, if you feel like you need to stretch, just do it. Don't sit there in pain. The main thing is that you're nice and relaxed, just enjoying the meditation. And again, just do a few rounds on your breathing. It's always good before you do any meditation to start with that. If you have more time, you can do longer on that. It just helps to calm your mind down and get your attention more focused in the present. Again, remind yourself of your motivation for doing this practice. We are recording, aren't we now, Susie? Yeah. That we're doing this not just to benefit ourselves, but to put ourselves in a better position to be able to truly benefit others. The first thing you're going to do is just bring yourself to mind. You can either just think of yourself sat where you are, or if it's helpful, you can imagine that you sat in front of yourself just a few feet in front of the face. If that seems a bit weird, just think of yourself where you sat. We're going to start this practice on ourselves. It's a good way of grounding it because we very naturally care about our own problems. But also it's very important that we discussed. It's something that Toby mentioned in the discussion, that we feel compassion for ourselves and kindness towards ourselves. As Lama Yeshe used to say, be gentle with yourself and you'll be gentle with others. So bring to mind some of the problems that you naturally experience in the course of your day, your week, your life as a whole. Be health problems, money worries, problems with family, friends, insecurities to do with work, car or anything, all the kind of problems we all experience from time to time. And just check with your very natural feeling that you'd like to take these problems away and overcome them if you can. As you breathe in, imagine that you're taking those problems and difficulties away from yourself in the form of thick black smoke. That enters a dark space at the heart in the center of your chest, and that dark space represents self-centered attitude, self-grasping ignorance and self-cherishing described earlier. As you breathe in, that becomes totally uprooted and transforms into beautiful white light. As you breathe out, that light totally fills your body and mind, purifying you of all your problems and difficulties, your happiness and every positive quality, those qualities of enlightenment, aspiring to develop love, compassion, wisdom, skillful means, and so on. Just do that for a few rounds. Again, as you breathe in, you imagine you're taking those problems and difficulties away from yourself, and all the thick black smoke enters that dark space of the heart, representing through the self-cherishing attitude, totally uprooting that. As you breathe out, totally fill your body and mind with beautiful light. Totally purifying you of all your problems and difficulties, your every happiness and every positive. Just do that for a few rounds. Really try and feel actually kindness towards yourself as you're doing this. It's really important that you connect with your emotions when you're doing this practice. Try and feel that sense of kindness. May I be happy? Overcome my problems and difficulties. Now I'm going to bring to mind a person that you naturally feel quite closely towards, and think of an actual person. Makes this more effective. Could be a close friend, family member, your mum, your dad. Somebody that you very naturally feel warmth towards, kindness towards. And imagine that they're actually sat there in front of you, just a few feet in front. Now, as you know this person, you're probably aware of some of their specific problems, so bring those to mind if you know that they're experiencing health problems. It's about family, money, and so on. To bring some of those things to mind. Even if you're not aware of them and they don't talk about them, you can be sure they're facing a lot of the same kinds of problems that they're. Again, it's about health, aging, money, work, so on. And really try and connect with that feeling from your heart of kindness that you very naturally feel towards this person. You really would like to do everything you can to help them with those problems. And again, as you breathe in, you imagine you're taking those problems away from them and form a thick smoke. Entering that dark space of the heart, representing the self-centered attitude. Utterly uprooting that. Transforms into beautiful light, and again that pours out from your heart, totally filling this person's body and mind, imbuing it with happiness, all those positive qualities again, love, compassion, wisdom, and so on. Purifying them of all their negativity. Again, really trying to connect with the natural sense of emotion and warmth towards this person as you do this, and as you breathe in, taking those problems in the way in the form of thick smoke from this person. Again, entering that dark space, heart, letting self-cherishing attitude and self-grasping, utterly uprooting that. Again, as you breathe out, transforms into beautiful light that goes out, filling this person's body and mind, imbuing them with happiness and every positive. Just do that for a few rounds again. Again, connect with that feeling of warmth that you naturally feel to this person. You really sincerely feel that you want them to be happy, to overcome their problems, and really key into that depth of your heart. And now I'm going to bring to mind a person that we find quite difficult or challenging. Again, think of a specific person if you can. Could be somebody at work, someone in your family, someone in your neighbourhood. Again, imagine that that person is also sat in front, just a few feet away, looking at you. First of all, check your actual feelings towards this person. Don't expect too much of yourself either. Inevitably, we don't get on as well with some people, because we find some people very challenging. But if you're aware of some of this person's particular difficulties, bring those to mind. It might well be a family member or something, so you might be. So again, bring those specific problems and difficulties to mind. Okay. You can remind yourself that if this person does seem to have a lot of negative energy, often that's a sign that they're actually not very happy deep down. Remind yourselves of that. Probably actually would be better for everyone around them if this person was happier. That's a good thing to remind themselves. Again, like every sentient being, they're trying to be happy, trying to avoid problems and suffering. Not always going about that in the right way due to ignorance and the other afflictions. And if we're not aware of their specific problems, we can be sure they're facing all the same kind of worries we all do, things over health, aging, and so on. Now, as sincerely as you can, again, imagine that as you breathe in, you're taking this person's problems and difficulties away from them in the form of thick smoke, which again enters that dark space of the heart representing the self-centered attitude, and take joy in the fact that it's really helping you to turn around your own self-centered. And again, it uproots the self-centered attitude, that transforms into beautiful light. And again, as you breathe out, that light pours out from your heart, filling this person's body and mind, imbuing them with happiness, purifying them of all the negativities, and again, all those positive qualities: love, compassion, wisdom. Now, just do this for a few rounds with this person. If you're doing this practice and you find this a bit difficult, and it can be if we really, really check honestly, you can just go back to doing the practice on yourself and your friend until you're ready, and then move again to doing it with difficult. But again, as you breathe in, you imagine you're taking this person's problems and difficulties away, thick smoke, entering that dark space of the heart, totally uprooting the self-centered attitude, and as that transforms into beautiful light, again, that pours out from your heart, filling this person, body and mind, being the happiness and every positive quality. Think how much better it really would be if this person really did have all this happiness and all these positive qualities. Just do that for a few rounds, quietly to yourself. Now, just to conclude this practice, we've only got so much time. So just imagine that surrounding your friend in front of this difficult person, you can stretch this as far as you can imagine to include all living beings. Again, just remind ourselves that all living beings are essentially equal in wanting happiness, wanting to avoid suffering. As long as they're enlightened, not necessarily doing the right things to achieve that. And again, as you breathe in, imagine you're taking these problems and difficulties away from all these beings, the full thick smoke, entering that dark space, representing the self-centered attitude, again reminding ourselves that's at the root of our own problems as well as cutting us off from others. Totally uprooting that transforms into beautiful light that pours out in all directions, giving these beings happiness, every positive quality. Really try and feel that sense of connection we talked about last week with the living beings. We really are all interdependent and connected, as we looked at last week. Finally, we'll conclude the meditation session with a little dedication. So let's first of all give yourself a slap on the back for your efforts you've made coming here this evening. Lots of other things you could have done, but you made the effort to come to this class. And particularly for all the sharing you've done in the discussion, which is a real important act of generosity, sharing really openly, honestly with each other like that, which I'm sure has benefited everybody in the group. I think how in the long term, through all the subtle little workings of cause and effect, contribute towards the benefit of all living beings. Okay. Did you notice when we lost Laura, Susie? I can't hear you, muted.
The doorbell was ringing, so she had to go.
Oh, right, okay. That's fine. No, I wondered if she got cut out. That was all cool. So she was okay anyway, yeah. Right, thank you very much, everybody. Is there anything anybody wants to say about that practice or any questions before we wrap up? I'm only 5 minutes late tonight. I'm doing better. What I would say, if anybody has any questions at any point about anything, and particularly that meditation, don't be shy to get in touch. You've all got our contact details now. It can be challenging, that practice, particularly if we do it, if it's really real and we really connect with our feelings. The danger of it all being very surface and nicey, but particularly when we start doing it like that with people we find difficult, it can be quite challenging. I remember it once really hit me when I was on retreat doing that practice, and well, I seemed to really connect with how I felt, you know, deep down, and sometimes that's good, but it can be challenging. And again, what I would encourage everybody to do this week, we're talking more about that practice, and we're also going to look a little bit at emptiness next week. But think of ways that you can apply this general attitude of really sincerely wanting to take others' problems away, using them to turn around or else centeredness like that, and this really generate this real sincere wish to give others happiness and to wish for their well-being, and particularly when we're coming into contact with people we're finding challenging. It's an important meditation, that, but I think Adita was talking wonderfully about doing it on a motorbike, wasn't she, at the start? I'm not sure everybody was here then. When she was coping with the traffic in Bristol. And it is the sort of practice you can bring to mind a lot as you go through your life. If you find yourself sat on a bus or something like that, it can be a good thing, a way of spending your time as well, usefully. And checking really honestly at how your mind feels towards all the people around you. Am I really feeling equanimity and kindness and compassion to everybody, or, you know, and so on. And you can bring that into your daily life, which is obviously the point with all our meditations. It's never in isolation. Obviously, it should be connected as much as we can with our walking, talking time, as it were, in our lives. So I think that's it for this week. Just to let you know, next week we're going to be looking at the last 2 verses. Verse 7 is actually about that practice, so we'll be talking about that more, and then the last one brings in the wisdom side more. I think I mentioned last week that I am open to suggestions for the last session. If there's anything people particularly want to do or cover, what I thought I might do is we'll devote it to discussing really practical ways of reducing particularly anger and other things like jealousy and problems like that. A little bit of practical Buddhist psychology, really, which again is really important for our subjects. But if there's anything anybody particularly has, any burning thing they want to cover up, because we've only got 5 weeks on this course, which is quite short. So don't be shy to say. And what was that, Susie?
Martin, I've got to go. Should we just
Yes,
wrap
well,
things
we're all
up?
going. We'll shut the call now. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful week. I hope
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Martin.
May you have lots of problems and chances to apply this as the week progresses, and I embrace those. I don't mean that like that, but I'm sure we will all have problems in our week, and we'll have chances to apply the practice. And look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye-bye.
Take
Bye.
care. Thanks, everybody, particularly for the discussion. That was great.